Welcome, everyone, to the latest I4CP Next Practices weekly virtual event. We've got a great group of guests today that we'll be bringing on board here in just a moment. For the time being, open up the chat. Let us know where you're joining from today. I saw folks from all across coast to coast within the US, coast to coast within Canada. I saw some folks from other countries as well. I think I saw India, the UK. So welcome, everyone. See a lot of returning names and faces and some new folks joining us this week as well. We are the Institute for Corporate Productivity, I4CP. If you're not familiar with us, we're a human capital research firm. We discover the people practices that drive high performance, by which we mean companies that excel in standard areas like revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction. Through our extensive research across human resources, we're able to tease out those practices, those HR, human capital practices that those high performance companies do far more often than low performers in the market. We're a member-based organization. You see here just a small sampling of our member organizations. They really span across all different types of companies and industries, from really large organizations like Amazon, Microsoft, Visa, 3M, and others, as well as much smaller ones. We've got regional healthcare, regional banks in our membership. We've got a growing cohort of unicorn startups as well. If you're with a member organization, great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us this morning. If you're not with a member organization but would like to learn more about what's involved, what that entails, what the benefits are, just reach out to anyone at I4CP and we'd be happy to connect you with the right person, or visit our website, the Contact Us page, and we'll get you that information. My name's Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst at I4CP. I co-host most of these Next Practices weekly events each Thursday. This week, I'm joined by my co-host, Marshall Bergman, Vice President of Advisory Services. Good morning, Marshall.
Nice to see you, Tom. Thanks for letting me host today.
Yeah, good to have you back with us again. I know the guests that we'll be bringing on board are people that you've gotten to know pretty well, and you'll be facilitating that conversation here shortly. But a few other quick announcements that I have before we dive into that. As you can see, the upcoming events, this is Next Practices Weekly. We do meet every Thursday at the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. You see, next week we'll have RJ Milner, co-chair of our People Analytics Board and Chief People Officer at Valuetainment. Here in the US, of course, the following Thursday is a holiday, 4th of July holiday, so we won't have a call that day, but then we'll be back again July 11th and July 18th. A couple of other quick announcements, some new things that have been released from I4CP that I wanted to note. A couple weeks ago, we launched our latest major study. The report is now available for members, the full report. It's called the Team Network Effect. There's an executive brief available for non-members. Zeta has put the links to those over in the chat, so I'd encourage you to download them. This isn't your normal run-of-the-mill team sort of collaboration research. This really delved into what's new with teams today and how networks are playing a more critical role than ever before. A lot of the findings were quite counterintuitive, and I think whether you read even the executive brief or the full report, you'll get a lot from it. So I'd encourage you to download those after the call. The other thing I wanted to note is that we have an annual conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, every year in March. We had a great event, biggest one ever this past March. It's called Next Practices Now. And for the first couple of months after that, the recordings are available through the mobile app. We have now made those recordings available for members, for I4CP members more broadly, out on our website. So the session recordings, of which I think there's a couple dozen, are now available on our website for members. So check those out at i4cp.com. And without any further ado, let's dive into our special guests and our big topic for today, which is culture and culture renovation. Marshall, I'm going to turn things over to you to introduce today's guests and facilitate this conversation.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, our panelists. You can see them arrayed there in their office. Thank you so much for joining us. It's rare that we actually get the three people most important to a business transformation and a culture transformation together in one room to talk with our audience for an hour. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to go through, give each of you a chance to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the business, et cetera. So why don't we start with you, Demetrios? Thanks again for being up with us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about Schwan's, your tenure at the organization, and a little bit about the business for those who aren't familiar.
Well, first, thank you, Tom and Marshall, for the opportunity to talk about a topic that is very passionate for me personally on culture. Schwan's is a company that started in the early 50s by an entrepreneur headquartered here in Minnesota. And really, we're a CPG company focusing on food, frozen food in the pizza category, Asian category, and also desserts category. And the company's been around for a long time, since the early 50s. I joined 10 years ago, 38 years of business for me. I started on a route delivering chips for Frito-Lay in Salt Lake City, Utah, and just retired last week. So 38 years in CPG for three great companies. And Schwan, so about 10 years ago, was really going through a turnaround, a transformation that was needed. The founder passed away unexpectedly. A few things happened. Frankly, from my perspective, one of the things that caused it to need a turnaround is a loss of the culture that it had. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're in a space that is competitive. Our key is to provide value products to consumers throughout the United States and also Canada now in these three categories. And we compete against world-class competitors. We compete against Nestle and DiGiorno in the pizza space, Ajinomoto, a Japanese company in the Asian space, and also Conagra in the dessert space. So we compete against a lot bigger companies. We're about $4.5 billion of gross revenue, and we have about 10,000 employees that work really, really hard every day from an execution standpoint in our plants and in stores. So the company is a CPG company, and I'm really proud to tell you that last year, according to IRI, for companies between $2 and $8 billion in size, we were the fastest growing company, regardless of category, ambient, frozen, food or not. So a lot of good things have happened, and I attribute a lot of that to the culture. We'll get into the depths of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the overview there. And yeah, it's a really interesting company. I hadn't been familiar with it at all. In fact, one of my colleagues told me a story about how a Schwan's delivery person actually saved her grandmother's life because she lived out on the farm and no one would ever come visit her, and she had some injury, and Schwan's person came out and actually called the police and got her saved. So, clearly there is a deep, long, robust history about this firm. And I think that's always a really interesting challenge for leaders when you have to change with the times, but also preserve what you've had in the past. So really looking forward to digging into that with you, Demetrios. Scott, what about you? Why don't you tell us about your role in HR there and leading that, and how you partnered with Demetrios on this journey?
Hi, everybody. I just retired after 15 years at Schwan's as CHRO. My background prior to Schwan's was predominantly CPG, HR, working in Richmond, Virginia, General Foods, Quaker Oats in Chicago. Came back to Minneapolis with Diageo, a global food and drinks company, and then joined Schwan's 15 years ago. And the experience I've had the last 15 years, in particular the last 10, has been probably some of the most meaningful years of my career. And that wasn't because they were easy. They were actually very challenging. But when you work very closely with the CEO, the executive team, and of course, Kari, to try and implement cultural transformation to really drive business results and to attract and retain great talent. I can speak from experience. Heads of HR don't often have that unique opportunity. And when you have it, you take advantage of it. And I should also share that I know that primarily on this call are HR leaders. The role of HR at Schwan's, in the view I've always taken, it's very much embedded in the business. Mm-hmm. We're expected to know the business metrics, the business strategies, the approach, really, as well as those that own the P&L. So when we do get involved in culture, we don't just drop in and start working on culture. We're business leaders expected to know the business, which then makes it that much more effective when we get involved in work like the culture that we had.
That's wonderful. And then, as Tom mentioned earlier, at I4CP, we do more culture research or human capital research than any other organization in the world, but it's always focused on what are the people practices that are actually driving real business results. So yeah, we found that HR organizations that take that business outcomes focus first are much more successful. So Kari, you and I think we had this crazy idea at the I4CP conference. We were chatting over drinks, and so tell us about how you've been able to work with these two to architect this vision that they had and make it actually happen in the organization.
Yeah. Well, you guys are really, really fortunate, and I am too. This is a gift to have this opportunity to hear the story from two leaders who are really passionate about it. This, as Scott mentioned, has been the dream to be able to do this work and to be part of an organization that really cares about culture and cares about people and talent and our talent strategies. I am the head of talent for Schwan's. I've been with the organization 13 years. I feel like I've had 3 different careers here, which is part of why I am so excited to be here. And that's really the story of most of our employees as well, as they get a chance to try different things and take on new responsibilities. And we're a culture that can allow that, given the scope and size. Before coming to Schwan's, I was in 2 other organizations where we did culture work as well, but it was not like we do it here. So I was at United Health Group on the Optum side. And then prior to that, I was with Dane Rauscher, which became part of Royal Bank of Canada. So different industries, now in this industry for 13 years, and you're going to get a chance to hear about why we invested in this work and why it was so meaningful and impactful, and why employees come here because of culture and stay here because of culture. And you can't say that in a lot of organizations, but we can say that here, and our employees say that too. So very excited to be here. It did start at the conference, so I will make a plug for this conference. It's fantastic. If you haven't been, it was one of the best conferences I've been to. So thank you for having us.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's get back. So we started to talk a little bit about sort of the business goals here, but let's even take a step back. We're going to talk about culture, but we know that culture is connected directly to business results. Talk to me about the business transformation that you were involved in, Demetrios, 10 years ago. What prompted it? What were you trying to do, and what did you try to accomplish?
Yeah, it really started with what I called a listening and learning journey. I spent the first 90 days as CEO visiting plants, retirees, employees, you name it. Anybody that touched Schwan's, I spent time with them. And in 90 days, I gathered data points so that we can start what we called our turnaround. And that turnaround, as I said earlier, was needed because, frankly, the organization was extremely complex, had a culture that was really based around silos. Employees only cared about their role to a certain degree, regardless what impact directly or indirectly it had on the organization. And after 90 days, we put a game plan together that presented to the board on what we're going to do from a turnaround. And frankly, every process, if it's marketing or finance or HR, every process needed changing and needed improving. What we had to do is prioritize what are the top 2 or 3 projects, KPIs, focuses we should have in order to make it realistic. And that started the transformation in order for us to have a more profitable, more strong company. And for me, I think every company, I saw beautiful logos there at the beginning that Tom introduced, who's on the call. Every company wants to grow sales. Every company wants to have a better market share and compete well. Every company wants profit. And every company obviously clearly needs to have capital and allocated the right way. That's the what. How will we do all those things is really where culture comes into play. And for me, they go hand in hand. And I will say this provocatively, and it's debatable. I love debates. I believe that culture is the only way that you can have sustainable results. And we can debate it, but what happened at Schwan's is the culture was what I would say not focused on, and it led to those topics, the what's, needing a turnaround. So for me, we said, okay, we're going to focus on the what's like every company, but we want it sustainable. And we started that cultural journey. And frankly, we started the culture journey about a year into it because to be very transparent, personally, I had the chance to work for Frito-Lay and PepsiCo and Nestle. I didn't know after the turnaround that I would stay or not. But culture is something that unfortunately, it's hard and it never ends. There is no month end to culture. There is no KPI that says, okay, you're perfect. Because as soon as you think you're really good on culture, it's like a personal relationship. It can go south. Just because I have a good marriage today doesn't mean I'm going to have a good marriage tomorrow. So for me, culture is really hard. And as a leader, you have to have the patience to allow the organization to make some mistakes on culture, as long as everyone is trying to improve the culture. And that need for our results to get turned around, but then to be sustainable, is really what drove us to having a very maniacal and very clear focus on culture. And as we sit here today, I can tell you in 10 years, we took 150 leaders, our senior leaders. That's the 12 executive and their teams. Every year we met twice a year. I can look at this audience and be transparent in front of Kari and say, look, we spent equal amount of minutes on the what, which is sales results, business strategy, and so forth. And the second day of our 2-day meeting was spent on culture. Every single meeting, it was equal in minutes that we devoted to strategy and how we were going to execute the strategy on culture. I'm very proud of that. And I think it's led to the improvements we've made to our culture. We are not perfect on culture. I want to make sure, you know, I will say to you, there are parts of the organization I know we need to improve, but I know we are continuously improving, and we are substantially better than we were, you know, 10 years ago when we started this business transformation and frankly, the cultural journey that we're still on.
Wow, that's so it's not, I mean, for us in this audience, that's not a provocative statement. We do agree, and our research shows that having a strong culture, having a healthy culture is a key to having sustained business results and basically outperforming the competition over a 5-year period. So, but what I did find really fascinating, Demetrios, and maybe you could talk on a little bit, is we find that most leadership teams are very reluctant to spend half of their time during a leadership meeting on the how, right? So was there anything from you, from a leadership perspective, that you needed to do to make sure that your leadership team was aligned with that being an important focus? Was that a challenge for you, or how did you get them on board?
Well, it's a great question. First, it has to start with me. So I can't say, hey, culture is important, but I'm not going to spend my minutes on it. It doesn't work like that. It contradicts. So I had to be present and a participant of that second day. And then we role model what we expect. It wasn't really optional. And frankly, Marshall, we lost some people because they didn't want to go deep from a culture and a relationship standpoint and the transparency for it to be authentic, because it's not some PowerPoint presentation. You know, our culture is based on, do you know somebody and do you care about them? The only way to do that is to spend minutes with somebody. We all know and care about ourselves or our family members, but when you take that to the professional environment, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to dedicate minutes to know and to care about someone? So if someone didn't want to do that, then it obviously told you what kind of a leader they would be in this cultural journey. And frankly, that's okay. It's just they're not going to fit within what we were trying to do. But it really has to start with me and the executive team and the 150 leaders, because we have 10,000 people that are not in Minnesota that we have to impact with the right culture.
Thanks, Demetrios. Yeah, and that reflects, again, some of our research shows, you know, first of all, if a leader is going to engage in a culture renovation, removing the naysayers is really important. You can't have those people who, you know, aren't on the bus. And number two, the biggest impact on driving a culture change is leaders' behaviors. So people follow what their leaders are doing. So making sure that you were not only doing that, but your 150 down were doing that as well. So Scott, over to you. You were you know, our research also shows that the partnership between the CHRO and the CEO is incredibly important in these sorts of transformations. How were you able to work with Demetrios to help him bring his vision to life? And what were some of the areas that you found that you were able to be really helpful for him and for the organization?
Well, I'll start with by sharing the conversation that was almost 10 years ago that I still remember like it was yesterday. And Demetrios had been in the company about a year. As you can tell, a very strong leader, and really driving a lot of business simplification across the company. We had way too many product lines, way too many programs, way too many comp plans, a lot of complexity. And if you're going to try and turn around the financials, you've got to simplify the business and focus on what's most important. And we had started to see some real positive turnaround in the financials, but we had a long way to go. And I still remember he came into my office and he said, Scott, we started to turn things around, but if we're really gonna sustain this and drive it, we're gonna focus on culture. And when I came here, everyone thought I was just gonna be the financial turnaround guy. We're gonna work on culture, and I need your help. And I want to make sure I'm clear about the language. He didn't say, I need you to come back with a recommendation. He goes, I need your help. So he clearly was going to be the architect, the driver, the leader, I'll say the heart and soul of the cultural transformation. So, and if you on the phone or on the line, when you know that you're trying to drive change, if the CEO is with you and driving it, it will happen. If the CEO is not, it won't, or it will only for a short period of time. And the point about the link between the what and the how, just to elaborate for a minute, when you're trying to drive a turnaround, there's a lot of bad things that have been happening in the business. And human nature is to try and protect yourself, to try and just talk about the good things, because you want to protect what your team has done, what you have done, and maybe even imply that some of the issues are in somebody else's sandbox, not in yours. I mean, that's reality. But when you focus on the how about building trust, when you build trust, and think about all your personal relationships, when you trust somebody, you tell them more than you would tell somebody that you didn't trust. And leaders need to confront reality. Demetrius talked a lot about, we got to confront our reality. We can't be in denial. We can't hide things. We've got to put it out on the table. And business decisions are made most effectively when the leaders have full information. But if people are holding two cards behind their back, the leader's going to make that decision based on limited information, which means it's less likely to be successful. You're less likely to execute it. So the link between trust, relationships, facts, decision-making, and performance are integrally linked. And that's where it wasn't that hard to convince the leaders, because most people and leaders want to talk about that, but they feel like they can't. When the CEO gives you air cover, and it's not only air cover, it said this is an expectation. And if you can't, you may not be a good fit here. People jump in the pool real quickly.
So Scott, I just saw a quick question popped up on the screen that made me, I'm going to go with this. Was there any disagreement with your vision of what the culture needed to be with Demetrios? Were you all completely aligned? Were you just, as they said, taking his orders and going with it, or did you?
Well, I wouldn't say taking his orders at all, because one of the points that was one of our flaws was that we didn't have a lot of constructive conflict. Right? A little bit of Minnesota nice, a little bit of give the head nod, and then see what happens. And so we had lots of constructive discussion and debate, because this is more art than science. So I had great experience and background. I had exposure to good cultures, as did Kari, as Demetrius. But basically, it was the three of us collaborating in his conference room to get this thing started. And there was no opinion that couldn't be shared. We debated it, we argued it, but ultimately we were aligned on what we wanted as an outcome. We wanted great talent, people that believed in us, people that wanted to win in the marketplace, work with each other. So when you're aligned on the outcome, the how you get there, it's important, but it's easier to get there because you all want the same goal. So I would say that's how we did this.
I think, Marshall, to add to your question, the thing that was not optional is how many minutes we're going to spend on culture, and if culture was going to be important. Everything else, as a leader, you have to leverage talent like Kari and Scott and really the other 150 to come up with the ideas. Because this is not about one person. My role was to ensure that we spent time on culture, but also to be flexible and adaptable to be able to do the right things to improve our culture. So it takes everybody's brain working on the same topic.
Right, and people have the opportunity or the permission to spend a good amount of time on that. Understood. So right. Kari, let's go to you. So I will say, we were joking about this as we prepped, that many of the people on the call are probably very jealous that you had this situation where you had a CHRO and a CEO so committed to this. But, with opportunity comes risk. How did you, leverage this opportunity and work with them to develop a framework to integrate this culture across the company?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And as you can tell, there are some strong opinions and personalities, right? So as you do this, you have to do it collaboratively, but you have to also have a strong point of view. And so that's what I learned. I learned, how do you take research? How do you look at how other companies have done this? What's best in class look like? We looked at things like authentic leadership, emotional intelligence, storytelling. How could we maybe embed all of that into our framework? And then we just went to work. And I think by the time we actually got the framework done, it was probably, Scott and I joke about this, version 83. He thinks it's maybe 38, but it felt like 83 to me, because we would change every single word and make sure that every word resonated with our organization. And we just continued to iterate until we felt like it was good. And then we said, you know what? This is good. We're done. Because you can continue iterating on this, for way too much time. At some point, you have to be done with it and start deploying it. And we'll get to the deployment in a moment. But the way in which we brought it to life, as Demetrius and Scott mentioned, is we brought our senior leaders together first. And they understood it, internalized it, were able to lead. And it's a process, especially when you're talking about emotional intelligence. I have to think about who I am as a leader. How do I show up? What are my blind spots? How am I impacting people in a way that I don't even know that I'm doing it? And you have to go kind of deep on that in order to actually have success, which meant we needed to have our senior leaders, like Demetrius, like Scott, tell their own stories and start with them telling stories. And oftentimes we learn best by telling stories that aren't glamorous and aren't perfect, where we've made mistakes, things in our personal lives, things at work where we've maybe hurt relationships or we've had bad outcomes. And that taught us something about leadership. And then we had to define what leadership was. Because in the organization prior, leadership meant I was a manager at a certain level and had a title and had people reporting to me. And we had to debunk that and say, everyone in this organization is a leader. You're a leader of the work. You're a leader of the people that you're collaborating with. It doesn't matter whether you have a title or not. You're a leader, and we need you to lead. We need you to own and drive this culture as if it's your own. And that's a process in order to do that. And how you roll that out, you have to have your senior leaders on board first. So it was a long process to architect it, but once we architected it, we said we're done, and now we're going to deploy it. And if we need to tweak it in the future, we will. But based on where our business is at right now, this is the right framework for us. And it was fully based on emotional intelligence and authentic leadership. And we used words that resonated with us. And we made the decision at that time not to engage an external consulting firm, because we wanted it to be our own, and we wanted it to be shaped by our own point of view. Nothing wrong with using a consulting firm, and I4CP has great resources. But for us, we had the time, the energy, and the iterative process with the three of us and others that we didn't need to do that at the time.
Wonderful. All right. Well, yeah, we're going to get into a little bit of what that model looks like in just a moment. But Demetrius, I want to come back to you because this journey started 10 years ago, but a lot has happened in those 10 years. We've had a global pandemic. I believe you were acquired by a CJ Capital. So talk to us a little bit about how your culture vision or culture focus had to change and adapt to some of the changing environment that you were dealing with.
Yeah, I think a very good question, Marshall. Really, our culture journey has not changed. It's been agile and it's adapted to the different data points, like socially, externally, an acquisition. Obviously, we've had a pandemic and also some social unrest that happened right here in Minnesota. But the foundation of our culture did not change. What changed is the speed of how and what we were communicating. Frankly, when you look at the global pandemic, in 24-hour period, we gathered our senior leaders, 150 people and the executive team, and said, look, we don't know the outcome of this pandemic, but we're not special. The whole world is facing it. And we said, look, we're going to go and adapt to something that we don't even know about. And really, this is where you leverage your culture, because culture is not just when things are great. Culture is really important when things are not great. And every company out there, every one of us out there, we're going through challenging times during that pandemic. And we said three things are important. Our customers and our consumers, they rely on us for food. We got to serve them. Our employees and our teams are very important during this time, because when they leave work, they go home, they're still stressed because we're all going through family challenges during the pandemic. And the third thing is we needed to ensure our company was strong to weather that. And we activated our culture from an agility and a transparency, saying we are not going to violate those three buckets of people or participants to our business model. And we held true to that. We had a very big customer that did not pay us. Internally, we could not weaken our company. We had to make some tough decisions, and our culture really enabled us to do that, because it wasn't that relationships were starting just then. We had built trusting relationships so we can have a very constructive conflict, as Scott said, and have a very dynamic discussion on tough decisions, because the general manager and the president of the BU wanted to just keep serving the customer. But without money, we would weaken our company and would weaken our employees and our customers. So those kind of examples every company was going through. But frankly, the pandemic caused us to be substantially more agile and leverage our culture at times when every company out there and every family out there was being challenged with something that we had never gone through before. So for me, that's a time when culture enabled us to come out stronger from pandemic because of our culture and the relationships that we had built prior to that. As far as an acquisition goes, look, our culture has evolved because we do have a Korean owner today. The traditions and culture sometimes from a nationality standpoint are different, but our culture is still true that says, look, lead yourself first, change your paradigm, understand that you're part of a team, understand we got to make tough decisions. Fundamentally, the culture stayed the same, but obviously we need to evolve and be flexible enough to accommodate some of the differences of a global company that we didn't have before.
Yeah, I love that, Scott. I love what you said, culture almost matters most when things get worse. I always think about it, as a leader, when things get tough, what are the 3 or 4 things you want everyone to just remember and know what to do? And that's sort of your cultural touchstones, right? So you worry about the people, you worry about the business, because when things get stressful, people forget all the other things. So I love that you brought that up. And I think that oftentimes people decide when things get bad, now is the time to fix the culture. You actually did the opposite. You fixed the culture and it actually made you stronger through some of the difficult times. Scott, any comments on that from how the culture sort of supported you through these different changes?
Yeah, I would say that, especially in the pandemic, we all were going through our challenges at work, but we also were going through tremendous personal challenges, whether it's parents, kids, siblings, friends that we know are potentially passed as a result of COVID. We're under unbelievable financial pressure. So we all of us on this call, we're carrying that with us every day. So when you're feeling that pressure, it's easy to crack. But again, because we had built relationships at the executive team, this building trust, we were able to get into tough conversations. And frankly, that's when you need the support of your teammates. I mean, there were times that some of us on the team, we'd stumble a bit. I mean, it was challenging. A lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure when you're protecting your people, when you're protecting your company, and when you're protecting your customers. And when you have built that trust, you pick each other up, and that helps you get through the next day. I would say in terms of the acquisition, agree with Demetrius, this was an evolution, not any kind of a dramatic change. But the one change in the business was there was an expectation we were going to triple in size. And when you're growing, that's one thing. But when you're expected to triple in size, what you expect from your leaders is going to be somewhat different. So we reframed our framework to really support the requirement to lead differently, to expect behavior, expect some more risk, expect taking bigger swings, which the company, when you're going through financial turnaround, probably wasn't incented to do. So that required a change in leadership behavior that needed to be translated into the cultural framework.
Wonderful. So Kari, I think you have the slide of that framework. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then we'll pause. Tom, I'll come back to you, see if we have any questions from the audience as well. But go ahead, Kari.
Yeah, so I agree with what both Demetrius and Scott said in terms on the process, and over the last 10 years, what's changed. What did not change is the time that was spent on this. And that's why it stuck. Because as we said earlier, that investment of time and setting the expectations for the leaders that this is important and we're going to continue to spend minutes on it is part of the reason why, regardless of what changed in the business, acquisition, pandemic, challenging business results, whatever, if you're going to continue to set the expectation with your leaders that this is important, it's one of the most important things you could possibly do as a leader is to lead our culture. Which is essentially leading our people in the right way, and us agreeing that this is how we're going to lead across the organization. I think that both Scott and Demetrius modeled that by continuing to set aside time and continuing to invest their own time and energy on what should the framework be. And what you see here, I would say, is more of a brand. What you saw before was a lot of words that were impactful and important. But now what we're trying to get to more of, especially externally, is when you see kind of this visual, right, in the colors here, what does that mean? So you don't even really need all the words because people know what the words are. And that's kind of the evolution that we're at right now. But I'll briefly go through what we mean when we say each of these things. And I will tell you, if you asked any employee in this organization to describe our culture, here's what they would say. So lead yourself first is this idea that I know myself. I know how I show up. I understand what my blind spots are because I have people I'm accountable to that give me feedback when I'm showing up in a way that I don't intend to, or I'm getting bad results. And I am fully accountable. We have something that's called the accountability ladder, where you go from like the bottom of the ladder where it's everybody else's fault. Scott talked about that earlier, where there's a lot of blame, right? To the I own the problem and I'm going to solve it. And we talk through those models in that way. And you've got people in this building right now who've got that up on their wall, the accountability ladder, and they'll refer to it when there's conflict or there's challenge in terms of the appearance that there's not accountability. So that's what lead yourself first means. Again, it's emotional intelligence that's really the basis of this cultural framework. One table, one team is all about trust. And it's all about how am I doing work with others in this organization? Do I understand the dynamics that are happening within the team? And am I making sure that everybody has a meaningful seat at the table? That was really the visual. And that's why you see the circle there. And that was Scott's idea, this idea that no matter who you are, if you're at the table, you need to have a point of view. You need to share your point of view. Doesn't matter if you're on Teams or Zoom or you're literally at the table. You don't just sit there. You have to engage. You have to make our business better, and you have to have a point of view. And leaders need to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to do that. So if somebody's not speaking up because maybe they're a little more introverted and they're processing, how do you create space where you can ask them their point of view? Driving force is what Scott just talked about. We were going to be tripling in size and are in the process of tripling in size. So what sort of leadership do you need when that's happening? You need people, you need leaders who are tenacious. And it doesn't matter what's going on, I'm going to find a way to win. And I'm going to help other people win. And that's what driving force means for us. It also means that you're not afraid to talk about tough issues. That's what constructive conflict is all about, right? So you can have tough conversations with people. You can still care about them, but you're not shirking away from having those tough conversations. And then shift your paradigm is that idea of you got to think differently. You're not going to get the same result by doing the same things over and over. You have to be open to new ideas and continuous improvement. We've got 18 manufacturing sites, and we need them to be every single day trying to get better at how they produce the products that happen in those sites. And that's what that continuous improvement is all about. So when we talk about our culture, this is what we talk about. And we spend a whole day talking about it, having breakouts. But the piece that we'll get to here in a second, and I hope that Scott and Demetrius can mention this as well, because I think it's unique and differentiated, is storytelling. Because when you bring these ideas to life through a story, it's very powerful and it's sticky and people remember it. There's stories that I told 8 years ago about my son, Declan, hiding my keys before I was supposed to fly with the two of them to Marshall to do a culture session. And I was late and you were sitting on the tarmac, standing on the tarmac, and I just felt so rattled. And I was on the plane and Demetrius said, you know what, Kari, turn it into a story. You're about to be up in front of 300 employees in Marshall. Use that experience, share what you learned from it, and turn it into a story. And that was so powerful. I'll never forget that. And that became, for me personally, became this platform for how do I bring about ideas in a way that's powerful and memorable through storytelling. And all of our leaders do it as well. And they don't have to be long stories, but they're memorable. And then they help bring form and substance to a framework that feels like it's sterile. So it's not just words on a page, it's not just something up on the wall. It's really something that's making a difference in terms of how we work together as an organization. And we all have the same framework for how we're going to work together. So that's how we talk about culture.
Well,
what would you guys add? Anything on that, the two of you?
Yeah, look, I think storytelling is one of the ways that we learn. And one of the ways that you pass down traditions. If you think about your own family, there are family units out there that have heard stories from their father, their mother, their grandma, their grandfather, that really defines the culture of a family unit. And I think the same thing holds true in a company. I think we are a sum of 10,000 people, and people do learn from storytelling. The other benefit to storytelling is you get to know people and you care about them, because some of the stories are not so good. They're sad. And it humanizes you. So regardless of titles and regardless of what your position in a company is, people want to see that you are human, that you're real, that you care. And storytelling accomplished that for us. It might not work in every company, but it did work in opening up, and everybody can feel part of the culture in our company.
And in so many companies, the executives are seen as almost untouchable. And that is exactly the opposite of what we have. The point about storytelling, lots of vulnerability, sharing stumbles, largely in personal life. And then when people see that, they realize, okay, we've all got issues and challenges and things we wish were better in our life, but we're trying to deal with them the best that we can. And then Demetrius's point, when people see that, they feel closer to you. And when they feel closer to you, they're more likely to be open with you and maybe tell you things and share things and perspectives that they wouldn't have normally done, which then helps you have more information, have more trust, and make better decisions. So it's really a tight link between that vulnerability and openness with facts and decision making and ultimately performance.
Great.
Wonderful. Yeah. So again, just you all are very aligned with our research. Storytelling and symbols are a key way to not only communicate the new culture, but also sustain it, right? I mean, it becomes part of the DNA of the organization. And as an organization that was founded by an entrepreneur back in the 50s, you already have some great stories, and now you're making even more stories about the future version of Schwan's. What I'm going to do right now, we're going to just to get the audience a little settled. We'll do a couple questions. So Tom, I'm going to come to you, see if there's a couple questions you want to share, and then we'll talk a little bit about implementation. Then let's finally talk about how are the business results, how is culture driving that. But Tom, any good questions from the audience?
Yeah, we've some of them have already been answered along the way, so thank you to the three of you for that, and maybe anticipating some of what the audience would be asking. One question was sort of yourselves. What have you all learned along the way? I think you've hinted at some of this already, but along the way in this process, what were some of the learnings for you as leaders?
Yes, sir.
Things maybe you didn't expect.
Yeah, no, I think, it does start with yourself. And that's why we talk about leading self first. So what I've learned about me, it just didn't happen in Schwan's. It's happened for 38 years. I mean, fundamentally for me, it's interesting. Now that I've retired and have time, I'm reflecting on a lot of things that have happened. And, I can tell you that culture has always been important, regardless if it was Schwan's or Nestle or Frito-Lay. That's just part of my leadership style. And the thirst to continue to get better from a leadership standpoint has really been from day one. And that's just something that is my own personal style. Every night, Kari, Scott have heard this. Every night, when I brush my teeth to go to bed at night, I look in the mirror and I ask myself, would you want to be led by you today? And there are days that the answer is no. Then the question becomes, why not? What will you do different tomorrow? And the beauty with culture is that we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for continuous improvement. And for me, regardless of your title, regardless of leader, I have an opportunity the next day to lead the right way, to sustain that culture, to improve that culture. And, there are most days that the answer is, yeah, I would want to be led by me today. And that keeps you honest, because you can't get up on stage and tell people that culture is important, but behave in a contradictory manner. So the learning becomes personal, and the accountability becomes personal on the journey. What it does also help you do is just become a better leader. So the learning for me is part of my self-development, and knowing that I'm going to ask myself at night, would I want to be led by myself today? Keeps me honest and focused on the right things during the day. So personal accountability is something that I've learned and continue to do. I mean, it's the same thing. Would I want to be, would I want somebody to be a leader like me to my kids, to my grandfather, to my mother, whatever the situation is, whatever the relationship is? I think that learning for me has been what's kept me accountable personally, and what's caused me to tweak and adjust and do different things in order to become a better leader.
Really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Scott or Kari, anything to add?
Well, I'll just add the point about knowing your impact on others. When you're a leader, especially a senior leader, people watch very closely, closer than you'd like them to, but they do. So being aware of your impact on others is important. And when you're a driver, when you're achievement oriented, when you're intense, when you want the result, sometimes that can be a lot for people to, especially junior people, to deal with. So I know for me, I was more aware of that, and I was more cognizant of it when I'm with group meetings or individuals, especially junior people, how I could come across. And in those days, at the end of the day, when I looked in the mirror and said, Scott, you had a little bit too much heat on the fastball that day. The good news is I can come back the next day and fix it and acknowledge it, which then is even more powerful because the person says, God, Scott was aware of it. Nobody told him. He came back and said something, apologized or whatever. And that means a lot. So that's why it can help it impact you personally. If it doesn't, you really haven't internalized it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I learned a lot about feedback and how to take that feedback and leverage it to make yourself better. So we have this embedded into all of our talent processes. So we'll get to that in a second. But performance and talent, and every time that I'm self-reflecting within those processes, I'm talking about how am I doing as a driving force? How am I doing as leading myself first and assessing myself, and then having my leader assess me as well. And so Scott and I've had lots of conversations. I've had lots of conversations with Demetrius as well around what are things that I can do better to get better impact as a leader, and to be able to have that framework and to get the feedback that, you know what, Kari, sometimes you're too nice. You need to have a little more fire. You need to have a little more intensity. You need to not be afraid, that what the reaction is going to be, and have a point of view.
You need to break some eggs.
Yes, break eggs, which I think I did a few last year. Anyway, but that's the beauty of this, is it's not just culture, right? It's embedded in how we interact and how we get better as leaders. And to hear some of that feedback sometimes can be challenging because none of us want to hear that we're not doing well or getting the impact that we want. But it's a gift, right? Like feedback is really important because you can't get better unless you get that feedback. And for us to have a framework that enables it, and almost forces it, is really helpful from an HR perspective, because then people can have a forum for having this feedback, and can get better. So that's what I've learned is,
Wonderful.
To be more fearless.
Yeah. So, so first of all, again, having that notion of having a growth mindset or a learning mindset is one of the things that helps organizations evolve, adapt to change, be more successful. So you all are clearly not only exemplifying it in your own personal behaviors, which is critical, but also building it into this organizational culture. And so, since we've got a bunch of practitioners here on the call here, I want to talk a little bit about how you took those beautiful words that you wrote on the walls, and how, as like I like to say, how do you take those words that are on the walls and have them walk down the halls? So talk to us a little bit about the implementation. How do you get this message out and these behaviors activated to 10,000 people across your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll start, and then I'll ask you guys if you want to add on. You've got to embed it in everything. Right. So we talked about those leadership meetings, which you can see on the screen are called culture sessions. That's an opportunity for us to talk about it, to internalize, to talk about how we're going to lead. You've got like leader stories plus breakout discussions, kind of full day experience, right? To really go deeper into these concepts, which growth mindset was one of them. Accountability was one of them. And we had models and things that would help people constructive conflict, talk through tough issues, that sort of thing. So that was one part of it. We also had Demetrius and Scott and all the other EC leaders talking about culture in their own business town halls all the time, organically, just talking about it and embedding it. So it didn't become this separate thing that, oh, now we have to talk about culture, but it's around how culture is helping us enable the results that we're getting. And I know you're going to talk about business results in a minute. And it did allow us to get exponential results because we could talk about driving force and what driving force meant for our business. Then we had it embedded in the talent and performance processes, which I talked about. And then externally, as we were interviewing candidates, we used this framework to decide, should we hire them? And then Demetrius talks a lot about this. Should we promote someone? We're going to hire and promote leaders based on this cultural model. And if they don't adapt or they don't fit within the model for whatever reason, there's no judgment. It's not going to be the right fit for our organization because this is who we are as a company. And we're going to hire leaders, develop leaders who will help us get better. as an organization. And then you can see the leadership actions and the framework. We would embed that in everything to give people a little more detail on here's what we mean when we talk about these concepts so that everyone was aware. But that's how we did it. We rolled this out, we embedded it in everything, and then we reinforced it on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think this is a very important one, Marshall, the recruiting, interviewing, and promoting, because this is where culture can get damaged. So there are times in the 38 years that we interview a person that is smart, is really talented, but is self-centered, but is not a good team player, but is not across the organization going to enhance the culture journey. And we justify it by saying, we got to bring them on because they're really smart, they're talented people. But the rest of the organization looks up at that decision and says, you know what, you're a hypocrite, Demetrius. They don't talk like this, but they're thinking this. Yeah. They're saying, hey, you know what? You say culture is important. You say reflection and caring and knowledge, but you just hired this person that doesn't have any of that. They're just smart. And then you start to lose the hearts and minds of people because of a decision to say, oh, I need talented people. And I can tell you, I'm not here to judge. All I'm telling you is for the 10,000 people in our company, we cannot have talent or smarts override how you treat others or how you lead yourself. Are you a team player or only about you? And this is where it starts to become hard, because in the end, very few people are going to have the courage to come and say, Demetrius, you're a hypocrite because you hired a person that doesn't fit culturally, but they think it. And once they start to think it, 1, 2, 5, 10 people, now you're starting to get to a spiral that doesn't allow your culture to have a continuous improvement. Very important. And for me, I spent time to not only interview my direct team, the executive team, but 2 levels down. And the only thing I wanted to do is to ensure that someone along the way told this individual about culture. So I'd ask them, tell me, what kind of culture do you think you're joining? And if they can't articulate that, and I'm the last catch, we got a problem, because people are asking about skills or their talent or their work ethic or whatever. So to me, you got to double check. All these things are important, but I will go back to whatever company you work at. How many minutes do you spend on culture will determine if your culture is going to have a continuous improvement and get better or not. It's as simple as that. I have 3 boys and I tell them, listen, tell me what you spend your minutes. I'll tell you what you're good at. Spending minutes on video games will not make you get a better grade on biology. It's not, there's no direct correlation. So I think the same thing goes from a culture standpoint. And when we go through the interview process, you got to make sure that the people coming in, yes, are smart, hardworking, talented, but also will further the what in the right way from a how standpoint and a culture standpoint.
That's right.
And I'll build on that in terms of the minutes. Twice a year, we have 2 processes around people assessment. One is performance assessment, and then one is talent assessment for succession. In both of those processes, in our system and process, individuals are assessed against the 4 aspects of our culture: lead yourself first, one table, one team, driving force, paradigm shift. But in addition to that, we spend 2 full days every year on our top 100 leaders. When I say we, it's the executive team. We go off site, we sit in a circle, not behind boardroom tables, so we can read body language. We have the profiles of these 100 people, which gets into deep dive assessments, and we talk about them for 2 full days. And they're long days. They're 7:30 to 7:30 kind of days, both days. And it's all about the how. I don't know if there's many, and I've worked with some really high quality companies that take the people assessment process very seriously and do a decent job. I don't know of many that spend 2 full days on it and have the kind of engagement. And one of the things that I like, and this came from Demetrius in terms of how you treat people respectfully, it was pretend that there is a closed circuit camera in the corner of this room. And when you're talking about somebody, they are watching you. Are they going to be surprised? Are they going to feel respected? Are they going to feel understood? That should be the standard we use when we talk about human beings, because they're human beings. We need to make sure that while we're direct and candid and don't spin the ball, that we're respectful as well.
That's right.
Hey, gang, I feel like we could continue this conversation for another hour, but we're running close to out of time. And I do want to honor the fact that both Demetrius and Scott, I know you've retired, and there's an opportunity for you to sort of share something you're particularly proud of that you've accomplished over the last 10 years of your career. So Demetrius, just quick to you, anything you'd like to share with the audience that around culture and this transformation that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, no, listen, it's a great summary question, Marshall. 38 years, I've had a lot of gifts. I did an HR stint. It was one of the biggest learning experiences of the 38 years. I didn't want to do the job, but my boss at that time, because he cared about me, said, if you don't do this HR job, I'm going to fire you. So I said, okay, I'll do it. But it was a great learning experience. And I think culture for me is really important, regardless of what company category you're in. I'm proud of Schwan's. We've accomplished crazy results. Red Baron today is bigger than DiGiorno. It was 10 points behind market share. Edwards is the #1 market share. BBGO is the #1 market share. We've tripled our profit. We've doubled our revenue. But what I'm really proud of, what is the gift that I take away after 38 years, I know the people have had a positive impact on my life. And frankly, I've had a positive impact on their lives. How do I know? These little cards or little emails of the gifts that I've been given over 38 years. As I retired, sitting in my home office, I'm rereading some of those gifts, because at the end, I can't be happier with the 38 years. Yeah, the KPIs are good. I've had good years and bad years, but in the end, the gift of having an impact on someone's life and someone having an impact on your life through business is really powerful, and I cherish that. So for me, that's really accomplishments been a lot, but the impact of these relationships have been substantially more important to me.
Wonderful.
I'll briefly add, because I know we're
Go
near
ahead,
the end, is that Demetrius and I both retired, and the question could be, well, geez, what's going to happen to the culture? Because you guys are influential, you're forceful. We have internal successors, both appointed, both decisions made really by people above us that are models of the culture. They're different than us, which is good. Different styles, different personalities, different approaches, but the cultural framework, the philosophy, the behavior is the same. So I have 100% confidence that the new leaders now that are running the company and HR and the other executives are going to sustain this the right way. And to me, that is just a testament to the fact that this legacy is going to continue.
Wonderful. All right. Well, gang, that's a great way to wrap things up. Tom, I'm going to hand it back over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on all the success, and enjoy your retirement.
Yeah,
Oh, we
thank
will.
you. Thank all three of you. And that was a great way to wrap things up. It's got to be a great feeling for the two of you to be leaving the organization and knowing what you're leaving behind as a legacy for each of you, and knowing that it's going to continue on because of the nature of the work you did on the culture. So thank you, all three of you, Demetrios, Scott, and Kari. Great insights today. The chat's been very lively. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but there were actually more just favorable comments that people were sharing, doubled down on many of the insights that you were sharing. So thanks everyone for engaging with us. Want to note in closing, all of our Next Practices weekly calls are available for recertification credit hours with both HRCI and SHRM. So if you're an HR professional and have a certification with either of those organizations, just jot down the relevant program ID or activity ID that you see on the screen and that Zeta put in the chat earlier, and you'll be all set there. Until then, hope to see folks back again next week. We'll have another outstanding guest. We'll take the July 4th week off as a reminder, and then we'll be back again by mid-July. Thanks, Marshall. Great job facilitating today's conversation. And again, thank you, Kari, Scott, and Demetrios. It really was a great event. Thanks again.